most of you guys are familiar with Kelsey and Angelina and I. We are the community initiatives team, but more importantly, we're the MidNorth Promise program. So as usual, we have a very special guest. We have Kelly Peterson from Brookes Place tonight, who is going to talk to us about grief and the different the different ways that people grieve. I know that during the pandemic, a lot of us are grieving lots of things, like whatever the loss may be. It may be loss of employment, loss of a family member, just loss of being able to go outside. So I'm going to turn it over to Kelly and let her get started. And Kelly, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you so much. I am honored to be here with you guys tonight. My name is Kelly Peterson, and I am the Outreach Director at Brookes Place. And I have a little presentation for us today to kind of go through some things, but what I really want is for this to be as meaningful to you all as possible. So the first thing I want to know is I would love to use the chat feature to find out why you chose this particular presentation to attend. I know you guys have options on topics that you can choose from and that kind of thing, but maybe what was interesting to you about this particular message that you might be interested in hearing more about, and or if you have any questions that you would like to have answered tonight, then I will do my best to get to those as well. So I am gonna find my little chat button. Technology, every time I think I get it down, it moves, changes. So anybody willing to share? Oh, I found it. There it is, chat. Maybe somebody can read it to me because I can't find it.
Let's see, Marcia is here. I'm in attendance because grief is everywhere and I want to be able to learn and help from others. And then Caleb and Celeste say that my son lost his father in 2017.
2017.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, fantastic. I'm glad that you are here to learn a little bit about how to support grieving young people. I'm so sorry to hear about your loss, and I hope that if you have any particular questions throughout our time together, please don't hesitate to ask them. I am very flexible and informal, so please jump in as needed. I just can't see the chat, so if somebody sees something pop up, let me know and I'll do my best to answer it.
Ellie, if this helps, the chat for me, I had to click on the three dots at the bottom, the more, to pull up the chat, which is the first time I've had to find it there. So I don't know if maybe that's happening for you also.
I'm gonna just take 1 minute and see if I can fix it real fast. My apologies. Because I can see it when I'm not sharing my screen and then it goes away.
Oh, strange.
Okay, there we go. I got it. Okay, so Caleb and Celeste. Okay. All right, yes, grief is everywhere. We're going to talk about that tonight too. Okay, so again, my name is Kelly Peterson. I am the Outreach Director at Brookes Place. Have you all heard of Brookes Place? That's another quick question by raise of hand or in the chat. If you've heard of Brookes Place, raise your hand or say yes, me. I have not. Okay, so we have some new friends, some that have maybe heard of us before. So what I'd love to do tonight is share a little bit about Brookes Place and about what services we have to offer. And then we're going to go into just some really basic tips and tricks on how to support grieving young people. But what I think you'll find is that a lot of the ways in which we can support grieving young people are similar to the ways that we just support people who are grieving in general. So I think you'll find that it's applicable across many arenas. All right, so here at Brookes Place, our mission is to empower children, teens, and young adults and their families to thrive in the midst of grief. So what I want you to hear me saying in this particular slide is just our goal is not to make grief go away. our goal is not to take that grief away, but to walk alongside someone who is grieving so that they can learn to do life still. I love this picture because it really is a symbol for me of the fact that even though the world seems to be breaking around us, life can still go on and be beautiful, and that is what we are hoping for at Brookes Place. This is a full slide of lots of great information about the services that we offer here at Brookes Place. Most people know Brookes Place because of our support groups, and that is the bread and butter of what we provide here at Brookes Place. We have outreach programming that's called BP8 or Brookes Place 8 short-term based peer support groups. And we also have ongoing peer-based support groups, and those serve individuals 3 to 29 and their caregivers. So a little bit about those services. Our ongoing and peer-based support group meets 2 times per month, so every other week. And we have 2 locations for that. One on the north side at St. Luke's, and then one on the west side at the West Side Church of the Nazarene. And during COVID, we did provide some of those services virtually, and just this month have started coming back together safely with social distancing and masks and following all of the CDC recommendations, but we are starting to come back together in person, and that is really exciting. Those services are so important, and basically our outreach program was developed as an opportunity to take all of those great things that they were providing at the ongoing support group and take them out into the community and break down the barriers and increase awareness about grief and loss. And so what we have done is we have partnered with some of our community organizations, and we provide those groups a shorter version of those, like a short-term 8-week series in many of our local areas. So our primary focus is in Marion County, but we do serve outside of that as available and as needed. But we typically go into the schools or community centers or churches. Wherever there is a need, we want to be able to provide the support. So that's a little bit about our support groups. The other thing I want to tell you about specifically is our therapy services program. We have licensed clinicians here in our office that provide therapy services to individuals and families ages 3 to 29 and caregivers. We can serve adults who have a child who is grieving the loss of someone. So for example, if a mom died and the dad wants to come in to receive support for therapy, but the kids aren't interested, which we know sometimes happens, we can still provide support to that adult as long as there's a child within the family that is also grieving. Some really cool things for you to know about this program is that because we have some incredible generous donors and grants, we are able to offer therapy services to individuals impacted by homicide and suicide at no charge. So those services are something that I want to make sure everybody is aware of, because I think it's a really great opportunity to provide that support after those specific losses. We also have some scholarships available for other types of losses. So if therapy services is something that you are interested in for your family, please don't hesitate to reach out. Camp Healing Tree is a weekend summer camp. We did not have the opportunity to host that in 2020. We've offered several other in-person opportunities throughout the year, or throughout the summer. And we hope that 2021 we will be able to come back together for Camp Healing Tree. And then there are things like we're doing tonight, which are community education and outreach to just provide information about Brookes Place, as well as just the basics about grief and loss and how to support grieving young people. So those are some of the things that we do here at Brookes Place. All right, I'm going to ask for some engagement because I'm really excited to get to know you guys and get to know what you know about grief. So I put together this really short grief myth busters. If you are in a place where you are able to share your screen, your video, I would love to see your face. I think it is a really great opportunity for us to build small community. And I know that's important to the MidNorth Promise. If you aren't, that's absolutely fine. You can use the chat feature as well. So all of my myth buster quiz questions are true and false. So if you think the answer is true, you're going to give me thumbs up. If you think the answer is false, you're going to give me thumbs down, okay? Or you can just use true or false in the chat, okay? So we're going to start with the first question, which is true or false. Grief means feeling sad after someone dies. Okay. Angelina, I see that. Okay. So we have some mixed messages, some ups and downs. I like all of the answers. So good. Okay, so this is a trick question. Okay, it's totally intended to be tricky. Grief means feeling sad. Yes, and so much more. We're going to spend time talking about what grief really is, but what I really want you to hear me say is grief is so much more than that sorrow that we feel, the sadness that we feel in our hearts after somebody has died. So good job, guys. Good job. All right, the next one is the first year after someone dies is the hardest. Okay, we have some mixed ones here too. Yes, this is a trick question.
Hard.
Too. I am tricky tonight, aren't I? Yes, it's intended to be tricky because I think it depends on who it is. I think what I want you to hear, I know what I want you to hear me say about this one is that there is no defined amount of time that someone grieves. There's no 3 days, there's no 3 months, there's no 1 year and I'm gonna be over it. There's no way to put grief in a box for every single person. And so while some people find the first year to be really difficult because it's the first year without them, some people find that the second year or the third year is harder because it's like they were numb for the first year and they were not able to really understand how grief was impacting them. So yes, tricky question again. Thank you for your engagement. This is fun. Okay, if someone isn't crying, they aren't really grieving.
False.
Okay. All right, I think we're pretty unanimous on this one, that this is false, okay? Everybody deals with grief differently. There is no right or wrong way to do it, and everybody does it differently. So even within your family, if you have experienced a loss and you're remembering the same person, you're going to do it differently because of so many different things. There's what we say at Brookes Place is there's no typical loss, and so there's no typical grief. So if you're not crying, that doesn't mean that you're not grieving. It just means that that's not the way that you are expressing your emotions or your grief. Okay, I bet we'll get unanimous on this one too. Ignoring feelings will help. Ignoring feelings will help them go away. Okay.
I tried it and it actually tends to intensify.
It does intensify it. Oh my gosh, it does. What we say oftentimes is that the only way to work through your grief is to allow yourself to grieve. We have to be able to go through the process of dealing with our grief. It's, I heard an analogy one time that grief is like being in a tunnel. You can't like stop in the tunnel. You can't turn around in the tunnel and go backwards. You got to just keep moving forward, okay? And so we can't just ignore them. We can't pretend like they're not there. Now, I will say there's a little trickiness to this one in that I do think there is a skill set that does help individuals that isn't ignoring feelings, but compartmentalizing them. And so that is something that we talk a little bit about when we're talking to specifically adults, but young adults and teens who kind of have the concept of being able to compartmentalize things. I mean, obviously the littles in our life aren't going to be able to understand that quite as well, but compartmentalize and basically being more intentional about the times in which we deal with our emotions, but it's not ignoring them completely. All right, so the goal of grief is to find closure and get over it. Okay, I see some falses.
You almost had me until that get over it.
Almost had you. Okay, so this one is also false. Closure is just not a realistic goal. Grief is not something you ever get over. It's not something that you can put into a box and tie a pretty little bow on it and put it at the top of the closet and just say, okay, I'm done with this now. That's not possible. Because the person that you are remembering, that you are grieving, that has died was important to you. And they will always be important to you. So the fact, or the setting your goal to find closure or get over it is just setting yourself up to fail. And that is not what we want, for sure. All right, I bet this is a unanimous one. Hopefully this is unanimous. Children do not grieve, true or false? False. Children do grieve. They grieve deeply. They grieve differently, but they do grieve. And so we're going to spend some time talking about how children grieve, what it looks like, and Kelsey, yes, check this out. Oh my gosh, Kelsey! Kelsey gets an A+. Good job. Sticker for
Kelsey,
you.
you're psychic. You saw that coming.
Yes. So
got the recording ahead of time.
I love that you know this quote. I wish that everybody knew this quote, that if you are old enough to love, you're old enough to grieve. So if you are old enough, look, even that little one right there, old enough to love, old enough to grieve. Differently, we all do it differently, but we absolutely know that even the littlest of littles grieve as well. And so much so, my little Jerry, is that his name? Oh! Okay, I'm going to try real hard not to be distracted by that cuteness. So much so that Judy's House has done some research for us and has learned through their research that 1 in 12 children in Indiana will experience the death of a parent or sibling by age 18. 1 in 12. Now, I bet if you are anything like me, which Kelsey clearly is, you're already thinking, oh my gosh, 1 in 12 is a lot. But how many think that the number probably is actually much higher? Yeah, because what we know is that these are deaths that are a death of a parent or a sibling. So yes, those absolutely make an impact on an individual who had a relationship with a parent or sibling. But what about the families who are being raised by grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, foster parents, grandparents, all of these things, all of these different people who are still really important to these kids, they're still going to grieve, okay? So we're going to dive into what is grief. I'm going to hit the high level things that I want to make sure stick with you, okay? So the first thing is I want you to know that grief is more than just sadness. Grief is multifaceted, which means that it affects us in so many different ways. In every part of who we are impacted by the death of somebody that we loved, that we love. So I could spend lots and lots of time on what this looks like, But what I really want you to see is this visual, that it affects our emotions, our physical bodies, it affects our spirituality, the way that we think, and it affects our relationships as well. And grief is always complicated. There's some conversation about like what kinds of death loss is complicated and what kinds is not. They're all complicated. There's no typical death, and so there's no typical grief, and so grief is always complicated. Look at this list of things on this slide of all the ways in which our grief is complicated. I mean, it could go on and on and on. What kind, how old the kid was, what kind of temperament they had, where they live, how many other losses they've had, what kind of relationship they had with the person who died, how the person died, and then all of the changes that they experienced because the person died. So maybe it was a mom or a dad who died, and so now this kid has to go live in a different house and attend a different school and maybe move into a different part of the United States. You just never know all the things that are going to change because this person died. And then there's that, COVID thing that's going on that really makes grief even that much more complicated. So I love the little image here on the right, because in our world, in the ways that we wish that grief happened, it's this kind of linear straight line, right? We're going to start here and we're going to end here. But it doesn't look like that, does it? It's much messier than that. It's oftentimes I describe it as a hot mess. There's so much stuff going on that it isn't linear, and it isn't just one. There isn't just one way for it to look. Unfortunately, what we know to be true is that grief is so often unrecognized. We miss it, and we don't do a really great job of catching the symptoms of grief so that we can support the child who is grieving. So this list is a list of things that we sometimes see with kids in the schools. Sometimes we see these things at home and at church and on all these different places that we interact with kids. We see these things, and oftentimes they lead to disciplinary action. Okay, well, he can't sit still, so I'm going to send him to the office. He's not controlling his emotions, so clearly he needs to have such and such and such happen during his day so that he can better handle himself. It can also lead to misdiagnosis. Some people who are experiencing grief also experience symptoms of anxiety, symptoms of depression. Those are very common. And ultimately, if we aren't recognizing these symptoms, there is unmet need, right? There's a need. There are things that this kid could benefit from that we aren't being able to get to that child. And we know that if we don't support their grief, if that child or teen does not have support and coping mechanisms and a support system, that it can lead to any number of these and more. Okay, depression, poor school performance, unhealthy coping skills, risky behaviors, substance abuse. These are all very common when we know that childhood grief symptoms are not being addressed. Too fast. This is another mic drop moment, okay? As caregivers, we have to recognize that all behavior serves a purpose. So if we as caregivers could slow down enough to recognize that what that child is doing is serving a purpose, it's expressing a need, then we can provide support and make a really big difference to that child. So I'm going to do a quick symptoms of grief because I just told you how important it is that we're not missing the symptoms. So these are really basic. And what I, again, want you to see on this slide is that everybody does it differently. Some people may sleep more because they want to pull the covers over their head and they want to pretend like nothing happened. They don't want to have to talk to people, so they just stay in their room and they cover their face and they just sleep. Other people have a really hard time sleeping in their grief. I oftentimes, when I'm working with teens especially, ask them, what's the hardest time of day for your grief? At night. Why? Because our world is so busy that we can like it or not, avoid thinking about and experiencing those really deep feelings because we're so busy. And then all of a sudden it's dark outside and it's time to go to bed, and I'm laying in my bed and everything else is stopped except for my brain and my heart. And that's when I experience those really difficult emotions. Some people eat more. I am a comfort food eater. Okay, so when I don't feel good, when I see some hands, yep. When I am upset about something, ice cream is my friend, and that's a go-to. I think a lot of Americans are like that. And yet there are also people who don't eat because eating makes them feel sick, or because they don't feel hungry, and everywhere in between. Somatic complaints are the things like headaches and stomach aches, especially with our young kids. They oftentimes are the kids that are going to the nurse more often. And there doesn't seem to really be a legit reason why their tummy hurts or their head hurts, but they're visiting the nurse because they're looking for comfort. They're looking for what's going on with me. Emotional outbursts, fluctuations of emotions, being happy 1 minute, sad 1 minute. We're going to talk a little bit about the fact that kids grieve in bursts, meaning they grieve for little pieces of time and then they have to go do something else. So you may oftentimes see you're having a really serious conversation with this 7-year-old, and you're talking really deeply about this person who died, and then 5 minutes later they want to go play basketball. Well, of course they want to go play basketball. All of these things that they're experiencing are really hard. Lots of irritability. We talk about the cup being really full of all the emotions. So one tiny little thing like stubbing your toe could send you right over the edge. A lot of people don't recognize how much grief affects our mental state. We are more forgetful, we're unfocused. You may see a decline in academics or work performance. I oftentimes hear people talking about discord with their peers, not getting along with their families, definitely more withdrawal and isolation, lots of impact in spirituality. And it is so incredibly common for us to see regression in young kids and teens who have experienced loss. And one of the things that I learned in a training that really has stuck with me is that regression is our unconscious way of returning to a state of comfort or safety. So let's say I experienced a death loss, and I'm 7 years old. I've been potty trained for a really long time, and all of a sudden I start not going potty where I'm supposed to, or I have potties at bedtime, and that's like, well, the mom is like, what is going on? This kid's been potty trained forever. Well, that's regression. That's us going back into a state of comfort or safety when we were younger. So this is where I want to spend the majority of our time, is what do we do to support these young people? Once we recognize that they are grieving or they've experienced a death loss, how do we provide support? At Brookes Place, we have 4 principles that really help guide our conversation and our interactions with young people. We believe, which you probably have already heard, that grief is a natural reaction to the death of a loved one. That doesn't mean that there's something wrong with them. It doesn't mean that they have a problem. It is a natural reaction to the death of somebody close to them. We've also talked about the fact that grief is different in duration and intensity for every unique individual. The way that Angie does grief is going to look different than the way that I do grief, and that's okay. But the ones that I like the best are the last 2. We believe that within each individual is a natural capacity for healing. We believe that with care and acceptance and support, they can heal. Now, just like I said before, that doesn't mean that they forget. It doesn't mean that they get over it. It doesn't mean that the grief doesn't impact them, but the grief can change over time with care and support and acceptance. So that last word on here, raise your hand if you've heard the word companion. Okay, so companioning is befriending. It is walking alongside. It is going through life with. Okay, so that's why at Brookes Place, that's one of the words that we like to use in how we approach supporting young people that are grieving. For a really long time in the bereavement world, the grief world, we talked about stages of grief. Has everybody heard about stages of grief? I think there's supposed to be like 5 stages of grief, and there's like denial and anger, and I don't know them all because at Brookes Place, we don't use the word stages. We don't talk about stages of grief because the original person who talked about stages of grief is Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and she created this these stages and talked about these stages, but they weren't intended to be like these boxes of what that stage looks like. It was misinterpreted through a lot of conversation, and ultimately what we now know about grief is that grief doesn't go through stages. No individual goes through stages 1 and then 2 and then 3 and then 4 and then 5 and then you're done, right? When you think about stages, you think about, okay, it's a short period of time, it's linear, we do them in order. But what we know about a grieving young person, especially as well as adults, is that we don't do it in any particular order. But the things that we know to be true that will help a young person is to know, to feel, and to do. And to know is to know the story, to know what happened, to be able to create a story about what happened. When we know something, we feel confident. When we know something, we have foundation. When we know something, we can come to reality, okay, with that. So to know is a really important piece. And then to feel. We talked about the fact that nobody does grief the same. We have lots of different emotions. It's more than just sad. It's a vast array of emotions. And in order to be able to move through your grief, you have to be able to grieve. You have to be okay with sitting in those really difficult emotions and experiencing those really difficult emotions, allowing yourself to feel so that you can work through those. And the to-do is about learning how to do life again in the midst of that loss, in the midst of your grief. And those are things that we really focus in on in our conversations with grieving young people. Okay, this has a lot of words, this slide, but they're all really important words about how to support grieving young people, how to support grieving people, how to be a kind individual just in our life and in general. Listen with a quiet mind. There is absolutely nothing that you can say that is going to take away or fix what has happened, right? And in reality, there's a lot that you can say that could really be painful to the griever, right? I bet if I were to ask you, what are some of the things that someone has said to you or said to someone that is grieving that, you know, maybe it was caused some pain or some challenge? What are some of the things that you've heard? After somebody dies, what do people say? Yep, that's a real common one. God needed another angel. Someone once compared the loss to their loss of a pet. Yeah, it's gonna be okay in time. Everything's gonna be okay. All things happen for a reason. These things are things that people say that, Kelsey, you're right, well-intended as sympathy, well-intended to provide support. But there really isn't anything that anyone can say that is going to fix it or make it better They're in a better place. I understand. Yes. So what kind of things, these statements can create a divide, right? You don't understand. Someone says that to me, I'm like, no, you don't. You have never been me. You have never had this relationship with that person. You have never had all these other things going on at the same time. Okay. You may understand what your grief is like, but you don't understand what my grief is like. Another one that I've heard oftentimes that I do think we still do as a society, and I find myself doing this as well, is saying, you know, okay, so maybe Angelina, okay, you said to me, Angelina, that you experienced a recent loss. And I say, I'm so sorry. We say that in our society. What does the griever then oftentimes respond with? It's okay. It is not okay. I don't want to put Angelina in a position where she has to say that her grief is okay. So one of the things that we talk about at Brookes Place is being able to say, I'm so sad that I heard that. What can I, tell me more about what your grief is like. That's not me assuming what your grief is like. That's not me telling you I understand. That's not me telling you everything's going to be okay. That's me just sitting with you. Oh, I'm so sad about that. Tell me more about what that's like for you. So that goes into the second one, maintaining a compassionate curiosity. You want to learn from them. You want to give them the opportunities to express their thoughts, their feelings, their experiences, and respecting that they may, I went too far, sorry. They may not have the same experiences and feelings that you've had, but we're going to hear them and we're going to validate, oh my gosh, yeah, I can understand why that might be really hard for you. Definitely respecting their pace, taking their pace. We talked a little bit about this earlier, that young kids especially can only do a little bit at a time. Teens can only do a little bit at a time. It's so overwhelming. It's overwhelming for us as grown-ups, right? It's overwhelming for us to have to deal with the death of somebody close to us. Respect that you're not going to sit down and have a 3-hour-long conversation with a child who is grieving about that particular loss. It's going to come in spurts. Create a question-friendly norm. Allow space, permission, invite questions. Invite questions and recognize that they may ask questions that we don't know the answers to. It's okay that we don't know all the answers. It's still really important that they ask them. And they may need to ask them more than one time. Kids learn by repeating what they're learning, right? If they are learning how to read, they read the same book over and over again, right? If they're learning how to count, we practice counting. They're learning how to grieve. We have to give them the space to do that. And it typically does come with lots of questions. And with those questions, we have to be telling them the truth at an age-appropriate level. This is a really important piece about creating their story, helping them to create their story, helping them to know, right? Is giving them the truth at an age-appropriate level. And then, oh my gosh, it is so important for us to create that safety and security so that they feel comfortable coming to us to talk. When children and teens have experienced a loss, there's not much that they had to control, right? There was not much of it that was in their control. So if we can provide them the safety and the security and the control over these grieving conversations, these really important, hard conversations, that provides them a safety net and a security system. And then absolutely being okay with seeking out support because grief is hard. And what we also know is that when a child is grieving, the family is grieving. So that child's primary support system may not be able, not willing, but able to hold that same space that they normally are because they too are grieving. I keep wanting to push it too fast, sorry. Okay, so here are a couple of things because everyone always asks, what do you say? What do you not say? So it is really important for us to use the right words and be able to provide permission to use the right words. We are a death-denying society. We have a really hard time talking about death. We have a really hard time understanding that death is something we all experience. And yet we talk about death in these really weird ways. Like I even earlier today said, I am dying to know. Or, you know, we use the words in a lot of exaggerated ways. But when it comes time for us to talk about death, what are the words that we use? In the chat, what do we say? When somebody dies, what do we say? Yep, they passed away. They went to sleep. They're in heaven now. There's a lot of different ways that we talk about it, right? And the reason that we use those words is because ultimately we're trying to protect the child, right? Using the word they died seems really harsh, but in reality, it takes away a lot of the confusion for kids. Kids are concrete thinkers. They think, they hear something, and then they have to understand it in their world, in their context. And so oftentimes we hear kids that come in and they tell us their story about like, okay, so grandma went to the hospital and she died. And so if I get sick and I have to go to the hospital, am I gonna die? Or my dad died in his sleep. He passed away in his sleep. Oh my gosh, does that mean that if I go to sleep, I'm gonna die? They have these concepts of what they believe to be true, and then they take it and they extrapolate it to all of the different life scenarios that they are going to go through. And so it's really important that we give them the words. We teach them about the words dead, dying, and death. The second one is about using the name of the person that died. That's so important because after somebody dies in our society, we have a tendency to not talk about them. If I don't talk about them, then I don't have to feel it. If I don't talk about them, then I'm not going to make you sad. So we avoid talking about them, and then their name becomes this thing that we don't ever say. Oh, that's so sad. These kids want to talk about the person that died. And if we provide the normalcy of using their name, that's a really important thing. Yes, and there's so often joy in remembering the person who died. Yes, I mean, I feel like anytime that I ask kids that I'm working with to share their story or share a happy memory, their faces light up. That's the thing that we want these kids to be able to do, is to talk about them and remember the good things about them. So what to do? Here are some things that are kind of more tangible ways for you to be engaged as a caregiver. One, provide lots of opportunities to check in. I did not say force them to talk, okay? That's not gonna go well, right? We all know that if they don't want to, they're not going to. But if we're continuously providing opportunities, I think that eventually they're going to find that they can come to you and will come to you. So I've provided a couple of ideas here, because I will tell you, if you try to sit down at the kitchen table and have a one-on-one, face-to-face conversation about somebody who died, it's probably not going to go as well as you think it will. But here are some things that could go better. Oftentimes I suggest a family journal. So writing about it versus talking about it, for some teens especially, is a lot safer. They can write in the journal, they can leave it out somewhere where you're going to be able to find it, and then you can respond to it. Or maybe you sit down and you look at the journal together, you know, once a week or whatever. Car rides and walks. There's been lots of studies about how people have a tendency, especially in this day and age with technology, to not want to do face-to-face eye contact, that it gets really awkward and uncomfortable. But when you are sitting in a car with somebody, you don't have to look at them. It's actually really not safe. But if you are sitting in the car side by side, kids have a tendency to talk more in the car. or go for a walk together. Oh my gosh, exercise and a conversation. So these are really great opportunities for doing a check-in that doesn't feel so incredibly overwhelming. Also, remember that that check-in doesn't have to be a 3-hour conversation where everybody cries. It doesn't have to be that. It's actually better if it's not. It's better if you can have a conversation, a short check-in with each other to provide an opportunity to talk, provide an opportunity to ask, hey, do you have any questions? What are some of the things that you've been thinking about this week? What are some things that we should be thinking about in preparation for next week? Is the anniversary coming up? Is the birthday coming up? Is there something that you wish that they would be here for? Let's talk about that, together. This next one is a really important one, and especially in regards to spiritual beliefs, is allowing the child or the teen to lead the conversation. A lot of times kids have questions about what happens after somebody dies and what happens to the body, and there's lots of conversations about spirituality, and I think it's a really important thing to help them to understand what they know. So I wonder what you think about what happens after somebody died, and really help explore with them what their thoughts are about that. And then you can, obviously build on that conversation, but giving them the space to process their own thoughts is really empowering. Genuine connections. I think genuine connections is probably the number one thing that we know to be of support to young people. And I mean genuine connections. I don't mean Snapchat and all the other ones that I don't even know anymore. Genuine connections with both peers and adults. You already know that teens have a tendency to lean in on their peers when they are experiencing a difficult time. That is normal, and that is age appropriate. And we know that they need grown-ups. They need a consistent, safe grown-up that will listen. And I think as caregivers, we can provide that. And then lean in on the things that they enjoy and help them to build on those as coping skills, healthy expression. So if you have a kiddo who is really into listening to music, maybe have a conversation about, let's come up with a way that you can express your emotions through music. Do you sing? Do you play music? Do you want to go find a song that expresses how you feel? Maybe your kiddo is really into art. There's a whole heck of a lot of stuff out there that you could do to engage their expression through art. I will challenge, this may not be a popular concept, so I'm just going to put it out there. I will challenge the use of sports as a healthy coping skill. Participating in sports is so important and so healthy, and it absolutely does help express our energy and our anger and aggression. But it goes back to, ooh, what's that? Do you see that? Oh, it went away. Did you see the red, or was it just on my screen? Okay. I was like, ooh, somebody colored. But participating in sports could very easily turn into an avoidance, right? Are they on the football field? Are they actually allowing themselves to experience those difficult emotions? Probably not, okay? Providing them a space to do both, playing football as well as finding some way of actually dealing with those emotions is also really important. All right. I want to make sure we have time for questions at the end. So be thinking, we're almost there. So this slide is about you guys as parents, as caregivers, as individuals who love children and teens. There are some things that I want you to be very aware of. You are a role model. We know that kids learn all things by watching and learning. And that's how we teach them how to do things. So I want you to do a self-check. If you are holding out all of your emotions and pretending like it's not bothering you, what do you think the child is going to do? They're going to learn that that's how we do grief around here. That's how we express ourselves, by not. right? So I'm not saying that you need to be a puddle of tears on the floor, but being able to cry with your child is absolutely acceptable. It teaches them that emotion is okay and it's safe to experience these hard feelings. If we can do it together, that's really meaningful. Self-care. We could do a whole presentation on self-care, right? I bet you've had some or could have some about just taking care of yourself. But making sure that you are also connected is really important. Making sure that you have those connections with supportive individuals in your life is essential. And then a couple of things that I just are so, they seem really obvious, but they get missed. As caregivers, there are incredible resources out there. So if you are in need of housing, food, supervision, because you're trying to work and you don't have anybody to be at home in the evenings, there are incredible resources. And that's what I love so much about being a part of this group, is I know that the MidNorth Promise friends would be happy to connect you with those resources. I think it's also important as caregivers for us to do everything in our power to maintain structure and routine for these kids. After somebody dies, the whole world is flipped upside down. Kids thrive in structure and routine. So if you can get them back to school, if you can get them back into their normal routine, it's going to feel safer for them. They're going to know what to expect. Remember that to know? They're going to know what to expect in their schedule. That doesn't mean that we pretend like nothing happens, but it means getting them back to a normal routine so that they're able to understand what's coming next. And then absolutely, if you haven't, if you have experienced the loss, definitely communicate that with the school. Just letting them know that that child has experienced a loss, and even discussing whether there needs to be any accommodations for that. Getting them back to school is really important, but getting them back to school and expecting them to be able to perform at their best isn't realistic. So what accommodations can we provide that will increase their success at school? You can do it. There we go. Okay, this is again a wordy slide, but I do want to point out a couple of things that would indicate to me that there was an increased need to refer out for some professional support. A complete and total denial of what happened. And then the rest of these things are, you know, like persistent, chronic, prolonged, because we talked about the fact that there is no right or wrong way to do it. If somebody is experiencing a change in their eating habits and their sleeping habits, that's a typical grief response. But if they have been in that state of not sleeping for a really long period of time and it's impacting their daily functioning, let's talk about that. Let's get them some extra support. Risk behavior, substance abuse, suicidal ideation, self-harm, those are all indications that, you know, this kiddo could probably benefit from having some additional supports wrapped around them. And then I also want to just say out loud that just having additional people to listen to them is not going to hurt them. My mom always says, can't hurt might help, right? It's not going to hurt them to have an extra person on their side to listen to them when they need someone to talk to. So I think it's important that we don't indicate that just because they have to go see somebody for therapy or counseling that there's something wrong with them. It can be a really healthy outlet. So how do you refer to Brookes Place? Here are the ways. Our phone number is on here. Our website is on here. So many great opportunities that we want to be able to make sure that these families know about, that you know about, that your community knows about. You also know people in your life that could maybe use this information as well. So feel free to share it with anyone that you feel like would benefit from some extra grief support. Because we know that when a child has support, we are making a difference in helping them to know, to feel heard, understood, and supported, to have a sense of belonging, to learn healthy coping skills, to feel a sense of control. All of these things are going to help the child be successful in an everyday world, right? Even in the midst of their grief. All right, so I definitely want to make sure we have time for some questions, but I want to be mindful of our time, and I want to thank you so very much for being attentive and participating with me, but I'm wondering if anyone might have any questions, anything in particular that I could answer for you, specific scenarios or things that you were wondering or hoping to get answered for tonight.
Yeah. Is it affordable? And also, I wanted to know if with the child, can the child, if it's not the parent, can it be the grandparent, the people who's grieving the most with the child?
Yes. Okay. So
to participate inside of the counseling.
Yes, that's a great question. So the therapy, or I think you're asking about therapy services. Therapy services is fee-based, but it is based on income and family size. And we do have some scholarships available. So I would strongly encourage, if you feel like therapy services would be helpful to you, to just reach out and learn a little bit about what it looks like.
When you say scholarships, is this a scholarship that will pay for the services?
It would discount the price of the service for therapy, yes.
Okay.
And then again, depending on the type of loss, we have grants and we have donors who allow us to provide us an opportunity to provide services to families impacted by homicide and suicide at no charge. And then you were asking about the participants of that therapy. We would absolutely want to explore anyone, anyone who needs that support to be able to participate in those services. That's a good question. Oh, that's a really loaded question too. So if I want to make sure I answer your question, and hi. So can I wonder with you a little bit more about your thoughts on not believing in therapy, or is it a discomfort with therapy? I know that there's a lot of individuals who have. I'm going to let you talk because I see you.
So it's mainly like a distrust and a taboo thing in our community. As I've gotten older, the first therapeutic experience I had, it was actually court mandated through juvenile for anger management. So that was my first introduction into therapy, and I've been a fan ever since. But most people don't have that experience, and you know, depending on how you were brought up, you know, you may think all you need to do is pray and then it'll go away, or all you need to do is, you know, keep venting to people who have no type of substantial assistance to give. So it's really hard for me to try to suggest that somebody talk to somebody. That's normally what I say. I don't say you need to go to therapy. I'm like, you should really talk to somebody. You should really talk to somebody. And they're like, I'm talking to you. And I'm like, I'm not a professional.
Right. Is it Marcia? Okay, Marcia. Oh my gosh, sweet baby. Marcia, thank you for your candidness. I absolutely know this to be true, that in our society, in our cultures, that therapy is taboo, and that having to go talk to somebody else means that there's something wrong with you. And I think it is really important that we do exactly what you said, encourage people to have an extra support person. What's so wrong with having somebody that will listen to you? And I would strongly encourage them to just try it. You know, I think it's really important that people have the opportunity to experience it. In my opinion, and I think there might be others on the call that would agree, I think everybody should have a therapist, a counselor, a friend, a professional person who they can talk to and get life advice from. I think we can all benefit from that. But I think it's a much bigger issue in our society, that people think that having to go see someone to talk to means there's something wrong with them. And I think I would just strongly encourage that there's not anything wrong with them, that it doesn't hurt anyone to have somebody else to talk to. Oh, I like that. As I've sometimes said, more eyes on the problem is always a good thing, or framing it as just a person removed from the situation to talk through things. Yeah, I mean, I think having somebody on the outside who isn't your friend, isn't your family member, to just hear you, to be able to
or
hear
judgmental,
all the things. Yeah.
or having a person to listen to who's not judgmental is a good thing.
Right, and not going to go straight to advice giving, right? Therapists are here to help you listen. Therapists are here, counselors are here to sit with you and allow you to express some things that some people can't handle. Grief is hard work, and we need to be able to provide a space for them to say some really difficult things, because no one should have to hold that by themselves. No one should have to do grief alone. That's one of our main principles here at Brookes Place, is we don't want anyone to have to grieve alone. And no one should have to. Everyone deserves to have a place to share those deep and dark thoughts and questions, and be able to process that with somebody that can walk along with them. It's a great question. Thank you for asking. What other questions do you have? I'm aware it's 7:02, but I'm here. I am a therapist by trade. I like silence. I will sit with you for a minute and make sure you don't have any more questions. I am going to put I don't think I actually have my email at the end, but I'm going to put my email in the chat in case you have further things that I can help with. I know that I can't do two things at one time when it comes to typing. So kelly@brookesplace.org, there it is. So that's my email. If there's anything I can do to support you guys, if there's connections that I can help make, I'm happy to do that. Reach out. Know that you are loved and you're not alone.
If nobody else has any questions, we want to thank Kelly for conducting this workshop for us this evening. I learned a lot. It really helped me to think about some of the things that I've grieved over, or people that I've lost in my life. I hope that everybody else was able to benefit as well. So we, as always, we have a quick survey or a doodle poll that we want to launch, and we want you to fill that out.
Couple of more seconds.
There's that silence again. Feels good, doesn't it? Let it be.
Going once, going twice. Done.
Thank you, Angelina. So again, I want to thank you, Kelly, for being with us this evening. If anybody has any questions, Kelly put her information in the chat. We also recorded the Zoom workshop, and Angelina will be sending it out to you guys.
Oh, you're muted.
You're muted, Angie.
Or you can share it with someone that you love. There we go. So again, Kelly, thank you. And just as a reminder, our workshops are every month on the third Thursday evening. Next month, we will have Michelle Frazier back with us. Many of us, you guys know her because she's done lots of stuff for MidNorth Promise through Old National Bank, and we will be doing vision boards. So we're asking that you RSVP to that workshop a little sooner than normal because we need to get the supplies delivered to you that you'll be using to create the vision boards. So it's going to be a fun. Yes, it'll be Kelly, come back. It'll be a fun time with Nichelle. You know, she's extremely engaging. So just look for the invites to go out. And other than that, I think that's all, that we're all done. Everybody have a good evening.
Thank you.